The rain had just stopped when Eric saw the stranger walking into the village. The man was tall, wrapped in a dark, travel-worn cloak, his boots muddy from the road. At his side hung a sword unlike any Eric had seen before, its hilt wrapped in deep blue leather and a strange symbol carved into the pommel. The villagers stopped what they were doing to stare, some whispering, others quickly going back to their work. Pretending not to notice, Eric had lived in this quiet village all his life. Strangers came sometimes, but they usually carried farming tools, trade goods, or empty coin pouches. This one carried nothing but the sword, and that made people uneasy. The man walked straight toward the tavern without speaking to anyone. He moved like someone who had been walking for days without rest. Yet his steps were steady, almost too steady. When he pushed open the tavern door, a gust of cold air followed him in, making the fire in the hearth flicker. Inside, the tavern keeper, old Bran, looked up from wiping mugs and froze for just a second. "You here for food or trouble?" Bran asked, his voice calm but with a warning edge. The stranger took a seat at the corner table, his cloak still dripping rainwater onto the floor. "Food," he said simply, his voice low, rough, and water. Eric, who had been helping. Bran couldn't stop looking at the sword. It seemed old. Yet it caught the light in a way that made the steel gleam faintly blue. When Bran went to get the food, Arik walked over with a jug of water. "You're not from around here," Arik said, trying to sound casual. The stranger looked at him with pale gray eyes that seemed to study him in a heartbeat. "No, the man said, and I won't be here long." The answer should have ended the conversation, but Arik couldn't stop. "That sword, where did you get it?" The man's hand rested on the hilt without thinking, almost protectively. "It was given to me," he said. "And it's not for sale." Before Eric could ask more, the tavern door slammed open. 3 men in dark leather stepped in, their boots thudding on the wooden floor. They weren't from the village, Eric could tell by their sharp eyes and the way they scanned the room like hunters. Their leader, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, pointed straight at the stranger. "That's him," the scarred man said. "The one with the sword." The tavern went silent. Bran's hand tightened on the counter. The stranger didn't move, didn't even turn his head. "You've been carrying something that doesn't belong to you," the scarred man said, stepping closer. "Hand it over. And maybe we'll let you walk out of here." Arik felt a strange tension fill the air. The stranger slowly rose from his seat, the chair leg scraping against the floor, when he spoke. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made even the scarred man pause. "This sword was not stolen," he said, "and you won't take it from me." The scarred man grinned, showing a row of broken teeth. "Then I'll take it from your corpse," he said, reaching for the dagger at his belt. In one smooth motion, the stranger drew the sword. The blade shimmered faintly in the dim tavern light. Its sound was unlike any steel Eric had heard before. Soft, like a whispering wind. The fight was quick, too quick for Arik to follow. The scarred man's dagger hit the floor with a clang, his arm cut just enough to make him drop it. The 2 others backed away, their faces pale. The stranger didn't press the attack, only lowered the blade. "Leave," he said, and they did, stumbling over each other to get out the door. When the tavern quieted again, Bran let out a breath he had been holding. "You just brought trouble to my door," he told the stranger. "And trouble always comes back." The man sheathed the sword, the blue leather grip vanishing under his cloak once more. "Trouble was already here," he replied. "It's just looking for me." Arik knew, in that moment, that this was no ordinary traveler. There was a story in that sword, a story in the way he fought without anger, and Arik wanted to know it. But the stranger was already moving toward the door. "You should forget me, boy," the man said without turning around. "It's safer that way." Arik watched him step into the gray, rain-washed street, Something in his gut told him this. Wasn't the last time he'd see that sword, and when he did, the real trouble would begin. The next morning, Arik woke early. The rain had cleared and the air smelled fresh. But there was a strange heaviness in the village. People spoke in hushed voices, and some doors stayed closed longer than usual. Everyone had heard about the fight in the tavern, and everyone was wondering who the stranger really was. Arik couldn't stop thinking about the sword. The way it shimmered, the way the stranger had moved, it wasn't like any sword fight he'd seen before. It was like the man had known exactly where each strike would come and ended it before it even began. He decided he had to follow him. He didn't know why, maybe curiosity, maybe something else, but his feet wouldn't stay still by mid-morning. He packed a small bag, slung it over his shoulder, and slipped out of the village. The road beyond was still wet, little streams of water running into the ditches. The stranger's tracks were easy to follow, deep, heavy boot prints in the soft mud. Arik walked for an hour before he saw him. The man was ahead, moving at a steady pace, his cloak swaying with each step. Arik stayed back, not wanting to be seen yet. But the stranger stopped without warning, turning his head slightly. "You've been following me since the village," he said, his voice carrying easily on the quiet road. Arik froze. The man didn't seem angry, but those pale gray eyes were sharp. "I just wanted to talk," Arik said. Stepping forward, the stranger sighed, then started walking again. "If you keep following me, you'll find yourself in trouble," he said. "The men from yesterday won't stop. And there will be others. Why do they want your sword so badly?" Arik asked. The stranger glanced at him, but didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Because it's not just a sword." Arik waited, but that was all the man offered. They walked in silence until the road narrowed into a path between tall, dark pines. The air felt colder here, and the sound of the wind in the branches was like distant whispers. The stranger slowed, his hand resting lightly on the sword's hilt. "We're being watched," he said quietly. Arik's heart jumped. "By who?" The stranger didn't answer. He just moved, stepping off the path into the trees. Arik followed, trying not to snap twigs under his boots. They crouched behind a fallen log, the stranger pointing ahead. 3 figures were waiting on the path, dressed in dark gray, their faces hidden by hoods. Each carried a curved blade, and their stance was too still to be casual. "They're not from the village," Arik whispered. "No," the stranger said. "They're from farther away, farther." The hooded figures began to move, spreading out there, eyes scanning the trees. The stranger didn't wait. In a blur, he stepped from cover. Drawing the sword, the blue leather grip flashed, and the steel caught the pale light filtering through the branches. The first hooded figure rushed forward, but the stranger's blade turned the attack aside with a single strike. The second tried to circle behind, but the stranger moved like he already knew their plan. Arik could barely follow. It was over in seconds, the attackers falling to the ground. Alive but unmoving, their weapons scattered, the stranger stood still, breathing steadily. He wiped the blade clean on one attacker's cloak before sliding it back into its sheath. "Come on," he told Arik. "There will be more." As they walked quickly along the path, Arik couldn't hold his questions any longer. "Who are they?" "Hunters," the man said, "sent to take the sword back to the one who forged it." "Why?" Arik asked. "Because it was never meant to be in my hands," he replied. "But I'm the only one who can use it without destroying myself." The words made no sense to Arik, but there was no time to ask more. The sound of movement echoed through the tree's branches, snapping, leaves rustling. The stranger cursed under his breath and picked up the pace. They broke through the pines and came to a wide, rocky clearing. In the center stood an old stone bridge crossing a deep gorge, the water roaring far below. "This is the only way forward," the stranger said, scanning the far side. But even from here, they could see shadows moving, more figures waiting at the end of the bridge. Eric's stomach tightened. "How many?" he asked. "Too many for comfort," the man replied. "But enough to make this interesting." Before they stepped onto the bridge, the stranger turned to Eric. "If you want to live, you should go back now," he said. Eric shook his head. "I've come this far," he said, "and I'm not turning back." A faint smile touched the stranger's face. The first Eric had seen. "Then stay close," he said. "Because once we cross, there's no going back." The wind over the bridge was cold and sharp, carrying the sound of rushing water far below. Eric stood beside the stranger, his heart pounding on the far side. 5 figures waited, their cloaks snapping in the wind. Each carried a weapon, mix of spears, curved swords, and crossbows. Their leader, a tall woman with silver hair, stepped forward, her eyes locked on the stranger's sword. "You've run far enough," she called across the bridge, her voice steady. "Hand over the blade and maybe I'll let the boy live." Eric felt a chill crawl up his spine. The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped onto the first stone slab of the bridge, each step slow, deliberate. The woman raised her hand. The others spread out, blocking the bridge's far exit. "You know what you carry," she said, "and you know it's not yours." The stranger's hand rested on the blue leather grip. "If you think you can take it," he said quietly, "try." Without warning, 2 crossbow bolts shot through the air. The stranger moved, faster than Eric's eyes could follow, the sword flashing once. Both bolts split in midair, their halves tumbling into the gorge. The sound of steel on steel rang out, sharp and clean. Then the fight began. The first attacker lunged forward, spear thrusting. The stranger sidestepped, blade cutting the shaft clean in half. The second came from the side, curved sword raised. Eric saw the stranger block, twist, and send the man stumbling toward the edge. The wind roared, drowning out the man's shout as he grabbed the railing to keep from falling. Eric stayed back, pressed against the cold stone. He wanted to help, but the fight was too fast, too dangerous. The silver-haired woman moved in now, her blade long and thin. It clashed with the stranger's sword in a storm of sparks. Each strike came faster, their blades ringing again and again. Neither gave ground. The fight pushed them toward the center of the bridge. Eric's breath caught when he saw the woman draw a small dagger in her free hand. She feinted with her sword and slashed with the dagger, but the stranger twisted, the blade cutting only his cloak. In return, he swept her sword aside and placed his own blade at her throat. "Yield," he said, his voice calm. For a moment, the woman stood frozen, her silver hair whipping in the wind. Then she stepped back. Lowering her weapons, she signaled to the others, and they moved aside, leaving the bridge clear. "You haven't seen the last of us," she said, her tone like ice. The stranger didn't reply, only turned and walked toward the far side. Eric hurried after him, his legs trembling from the rush of fear and cold. Once they were past the bridge, the stranger slowed, scanning the rocky trail ahead. "They'll follow," he said, "but not yet. They need orders." "First, orders from who?" Eric asked. The man looked at him for a moment, then said, "From the one who forged this sword." They walked until the trail curved into a small sheltered valley. A single wooden cabin stood there, half hidden among pine trees. The stranger pushed open the door without knocking. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and dried herbs. An old man sat by the fire, his eyes sharp despite the deep lines on his face. "You brought the boy," the old man said, looking at Eric before turning to the stranger. "And you brought the sword, so it's begun." The stranger nodded, setting the blade across the table. "They're moving faster than I thought," he said. "They've sent hunters." And the bridge was guarded. The old man leaned forward, running a hand along the sword's blue leather grip. "They won't stop," he said. Because that sword is the last key to the gate. Arik frowned. The gate. The old man looked at him, his voice low, a place that should never be opened. Before Arik could ask more, the stranger turned sharply toward the door. Someone was outside, footsteps crunching on the frosted ground. He motioned for Arik to stay back, then stepped into the doorway, sword ready. 3 shapes appeared from the trees. Moving slowly, their hands empty. One of them, a thin man with dark eyes, raised his hands in peace. "We're not here to fight," he said. "We need to talk about what's coming." The stranger didn't lower his sword. "What's coming?" he asked. The thin man's gaze shifted to Arik. "The boy," he said. "He's part of it. Whether you want him to be or not." Arik felt the world tilt. He didn't know who these people were, or why they spoke like they knew him. But the stranger's face had gone completely still, and in that silence, Arik realized things were about to get far worse than he had imagined. The thin man's words hung in the cold air. Arik stood frozen, his bag still slung over his shoulder. "What do you mean, I'm part of it?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The man stepped closer, his hands still raised to show he carried no weapon. "You have the mark," he said, "hidden on your arm." Arik blinked, confused. "I don't have any mark," he replied. The man's eyes narrowed. "Roll up your sleeve," he said, quietly. The stranger stepped between them, sword still in hand. "You're not touching him," he said, his tone hard, but Arik, curiosity and fear twisting inside him, slowly rolled up the sleeve of his tunic. At first, he saw nothing. Then, as the firelight caught his skin, faint lines began to appear, thin silver shapes forming a symbol he had never seen before. It glowed for a heartbeat, then faded back into nothing. Arik's breath caught. The old man by the fire leaned forward, his eyes wide. "So it's true," he whispered, "the mark of the keeper." The stranger glanced at the old man sharply. "You never said anything about a keeper." "I didn't think there was one left," the old man replied. "Until now." Arik's head spun. "What's a keeper?" The thin man answered before anyone else could. "The one who can close the gate," he said. "The one who can stop what's coming." Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters. It carried with it a faint, eerie sound, like a horn far in the distance. The stranger turned toward the door. His voice clipped. "They've found us." The old man stood, grabbing a small leather satchel from the wall. "You can't stay here," he said. "They'll burn this place to the ground to get him." Arik felt the stranger's hand grip his shoulder, firm and unyielding. "Move," the man said. They left the cabin through the back door, the cold biting at their faces. Snowflakes had begun to fall. Swirling in the wind, the forest beyond was dark, the pines creaking in the gusts. They moved quickly, following a narrow deer trail that wound between steep ridges. Arik kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the silver-haired woman and her fighters emerging from the trees. But the forest was empty, too empty. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals, just the crunch of their boots on frozen ground. After a while, the stranger slowed, scanning the trees. "They're hurting us," he said, his voice low. "To where?" Arik asked. The answer came in the form of flickering light ahead torches. Many of them, figures were waiting in the clearing, their shadows long and shifting in the snow. The stranger drew the sword without a word, the steel catching the torchlight. In a flash of blue, Arik felt his heartbeat hammering in his ears. The thin man stepped forward, calling out to the torchbearers. "We have the boy," he said. "And the sword, no need for blood tonight." The leader stepped forward, and Arik's stomach dropped. It was the silver-haired woman from the bridge. Her gaze swept over them, stopping on Arik. "So the keeper shows himself," she said softly, almost like she was pleased. Her eyes shifted to the stranger. "And you?" "Still carrying what isn't yours. I'm carrying what I was trusted with." The stranger replied, and I'll die before I give it to you." "Then die," she said, and raised her hand. The fighters surged forward. Snow sprang under their boots. The stranger met them head-on. The sword flashing in arcs of steel and blue light, Arik stumbled back. But two of the attackers broke past the stranger, coming straight for him before he could run. Something inside him pulsed a strange warmth spreading from his arm. The silver lines of the mark lit up again, brighter than before. The attackers froze mid-step, their weapons shaking in their hands. A sound filled the air, not from the forest, not from the wind, but from the mark itself. It was deep, like the toll of a bell, and it seemed to press against everything around them. The men dropped their blades and fell to their knees, covering their ears. The silver-haired woman's eyes widened. "So it's true," she whispered. "You can't touch him without the mark defending itself." Eric stared at his arm, the glow slowly fading. He didn't understand what had just happened. But he knew one thing: he wasn't just along for the ride anymore. He was part of this, whether he wanted to be or not. The stranger cut down the last fighter standing and stepped between Arik and the woman. "This ends now," he said, his sword steady, but she only smiled. "No," she said, "this is only the beginning." Then, with a sharp whistle, she signaled her people, and they melted back into the trees, leaving only the sound of the wind and the falling snow. Arik stood shaking, his breath fogging in the cold air. The stranger sheathed his sword and looked at him. "From now on," he said, "you don't leave my side." And in that moment, Arik realized he had just stepped onto a path that would change everything he thought he knew. By morning, the snow had stopped. The world was white and silent, the trees heavy with frost. Arik followed close behind the stranger, every step crunching in the cold. They had walked for hours without speaking, the events of the night still heavy in Arik's mind. He kept glancing at his arm, half expecting the silver mark to glow again. It stayed hidden, as if nothing had happened. But he couldn't forget how it had felt, like something deep inside him had woken up. The stranger noticed his glances, but said nothing. His eyes stayed on the road ahead, scanning every shadow. Finally, Arik broke the silence. "Where are we going?" The stranger's voice was low. "North," he said, "through the ridge, past, then to the wastes." Arik frowned. "The wastes? That's just empty land." "That's what people say," the stranger replied. "But that's where we'll find answers." They climbed higher into the ridges, the wind colder, sharper. The narrow path wound along cliffs where one wrong step meant to fall into darkness. Arik tried not to look down. The stranger moved with steady confidence, but his hand stayed near his sword. It was as if he knew something or someone was waiting ahead. By midday, they reached a stretch where the cliffs opened into a wide basin. A frozen river cut through the middle, its surface cracked in places. They crossed slowly, boots slipping on the ice. Halfway across, the stranger stopped, his head tilting. "Do you hear that?" he asked. At first, Arik heard nothing but the wind, then soft and distant, the sound of hooves on snow. The stranger's expression hardened. "They're behind us," he said. Without another word, he quickened his pace, pulling Arik toward the far bank. They made it to the trees, just as the riders appeared on the ridge above the river. Dark shapes against the pale sky, moving fast. The stranger pushed Arik ahead. "Run," he said, "and don't stop until I tell you." They ran through the snow, branches whipping at their faces. The sound of the riders grew louder, closer. Arik's legs burned, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Then he heard the hiss of an arrow passing close to his ear. Another struck a tree beside him, splintering the bark. The stranger spun, drawing his sword in a single motion. Blue light rippled along the blade as he slashed the next arrow from the air. The riders burst through the trees, 5 of them, faces hidden by black masks. The stranger moved to meet them. his strikes quick and precise. The first rider fell from his horse, the second veered away. But the others kept coming, surrounding them. Go. The stranger shouted to Arik, but Arik froze, his eyes locking on one of the riders. The man's cloak shifted, and on his arm was the same silver mark as Eric's. The rider saw Eric stare and pulled back his sleeve, showing the mark fully. "You don't know what you are, boy," the rider called, "but you will if you survive." Before Arik could speak, the stranger's blade struck, knocking the rider's weapon aside. "Leave him." The stranger barked, his voice sharp. The rider only laughed and turned his horse. Retreating into the trees, the others followed, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. Eric stood panting in the cold. "Who was that?" he asked. The stranger shook his head. "Someone who shouldn't exist." He said quietly, "Someone like you." They didn't rest. Moving quickly through the forest until they reached the far side of the basin, there, the land opened again, revealing a stretch of barren hills and frozen ground. "This is the edge of the wastes," the stranger said. "No one comes here unless they have to." As they walked, Arik noticed strange shapes half buried in the snow ruins of stone walls. Broken pillars. "What is this place?" he asked. "An old battleground," the stranger replied. "Where the first keepers fought to seal the gate, they stopped at the remains of a tower. Its base still standing. Inside, the air was still and heavy, the walls lined with faded carvings. Eric traced one with his fingers. It showed a figure holding a sword like the stranger's, facing a great black shape. "The gate," the stranger said quietly, standing beside him. "And the thing that waits beyond it." Before Eric could ask more, a low rumble shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the carvings seemed to shimmer faintly. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "They've found the path," he said, his hand tightening on the sword. "They're coming, outside." Dark figures were moving across the snow, too many to count. The stranger glanced at Eric. "Inside this tower is a stair," he said, "and at the top is something you need to see." "What about them?" Arik asked. The stranger smiled faintly. "I'll keep them busy now, go." Eric hesitated only a moment before running up the worn stone steps. The sound of steel clashing below echoed up the stairwell. At the top, the wind struck him like a wall. He stepped onto the crumbling roof and froze. Far away, rising from the horizon, was a black spire reaching into the clouds. It pulsed with a faint, sickly light, and deep inside, Arik felt the mark on his arm burn, whatever lay beyond. That spire, he knew, which was calling to him. The cold wind whipped across the crumbling roof, stinging Eric's face. His eyes stayed fixed on the black spire in the distance. It rose like a claw tearing at the clouds, its faint light pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm. Each pulse seemed to tug at something inside him, pulling him forward below. The clash of steel and the shouts of battle echoed from the base of the tower. The stranger was still fighting, holding off the dark figures that had followed them into the wastes. Eric forced himself to look away from the spire. He had come up here for a reason, because the stranger said there was something he needed to see. The roof was broken in places, its stone cracked by years of wind and frost. At the center, half buried in snow, lay a stone pedestal. Carvings covered its surface, circles, lines, and a symbol that matched the mark on Eric's arm. His pulse quickened. Without thinking, he reached out and touched it. The moment his fingers brushed the stone, the world around him changed. The cold, the wind, the sound of battle all vanished. He stood in a vast, silent place. The ground smooth like glass. Above him, no sky, only an endless void filled with drifting lights. A voice deep and steady spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Keeper," it said, "you have been found." Eric spun, searching for the speaker, but saw no one. "I don't understand," he said. The voice replied, "You will. The gate stirs." And the seal weakens your mark is the last link to close it. Images flickered around him, warriors with marks like his, standing before the black spire, their swords raised. Some fell in battle. Others vanished into the light. The voice grew heavier. The one who carries the blue sword is bound to you without him. You cannot reach the gate alive, Eric's mind reeled. What's inside the gate? He asked. The answer came like a shiver through the ground. Something older than this world. Something that waits for the door to open. A sudden crash shattered the vision. Eric blinked and the cold wind was back. Below, he heard the stranger shout his name. The battle had moved inside the tower. Boots thudded on the stairs. Growing closer, Eric's hand burned, the mark glowing bright silver. He grabbed the edge of the pedestal, and for a moment, it glowed too. Then a beam of light shot from it. Striking the wall, the stone cracked, revealing a hidden recess inside. Lay a small black crystal, no larger than a coin. He snatched it just as the first attacker burst onto the roof. A man in black armor, his eyes glowing faint red. Eric stumbled back, the crystal clenched in his fist. The man raised his blade butt. Before it could fall, a flash of blue light cut through the air. The stranger stood in the doorway, sword drawn. Move? The stranger barked. Eric darted past him, rushing down the stairs. The stranger blocked the armored man's path, their blades meeting in a ringing clash. Every step Eric took echoed in the stone passage. He reached the base of the tower and froze. The bodies of their attackers lay scattered across the snow. Some still groaning, others too still to move. The thin man they had met earlier stood among them, holding a bloodied spear. He looked at Eric's glowing arm and the black crystal in his hand. You found it, he said. Good, now, keep it hidden. The stranger came down moments later, breathing hard. We need to move, he said. Scanning the horizon, they'll send more. They left the tower and headed north. The snow crunching under their boots, the spire was closer now, its black shape rising above the horizon like a silent threat. Each pulse of light seemed stronger. And Eric could feel the crystal in his hand grow warmer by the time they stopped. To rest in the shelter of a rocky outcrop, Eric could barely keep his eyes open. The stranger sat beside him, wiping his sword clean. What happened up there? He asked without looking at him. Eric hesitated, then told him about the voice, the vision, and the crystal. The stranger's jaw tightened. Then, it's worse than I thought. He said, the seal really is breaking. The thin man crouched. Nearby, his eyes narrowing. If the seal falls, the gate will open and nothing in this world will stop what's inside from coming through. Eric stared at the crystal in his hand. What am I supposed to do with this? Protect it, the stranger said. And when the time comes, use it? Eric didn't know what that meant, but deep down, he had the uneasy feeling that when the time came, using it would mean more than just surviving. Far off, in the direction of the spire, a new light flared, dread and harsh. The stranger stood, his expression grim. They've started the ritual, he said. Eric's hand tightened on the crystal. Whatever waited at that spire was no longer sleeping. The red light from the spire grew brighter as they drew closer. It cut through the falling snow like fire through smoke. Eric's mark burned hot against his skin, each pulse matching the rhythm of the spire's glow. The stranger walked ahead, his sword unsheathed, the blue leather grip dark in the dim light. They moved fast across the frozen ground, the thin man following close behind. No one spoke, there was nothing to say. The closer they came, the more the air seemed to hum. A low vibration that filled Eric's chest and made his teeth ache. Snow and wind swirled harder now. But the spire seemed untouched by the storm at PI. At last they reached the base of the spire. It rose from a black stone platform, its surface cracked and covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift when Eric looked at them too long. At the center of the platform stood a massive arch opening filled with swirling darkness. Shadows moved inside that darkness, slow and shifting, like something waiting to step through. Figures in dark armor stood in a wide circle around the arch. At their head was the silver-haired woman, her long blade resting casually at her side. When she saw them, her smile was cold. "You've come just in time," she said. "The gate is nearly open. Hand me the crystal, and you can watch history change." Eric's hand tightened around the black crystal. The stranger stepped in front of him, his sword raised. "You open that gate, and there will be no world left to change," he said. The woman laughed softly. "There will be a new world," she replied, "and I will rule it." She raised her hand, and her warriors closed in. The stranger met them head-on, his blade flashing blue in the red light. The clash of steel rang across the platform. Arik ducked as an arrow shot past his head, the thin man knocking another attacker away with his spear. The silver-haired woman moved toward Arik, her eyes locked on the crystal. He backed away, the heat in his arm growing almost unbearable. "Give it to me, boy," she said, her voice sharp now. "You don't even know how to use it." Erik felt the pedestal vision echo in his mind. The deep voice sang, "When the time comes, use it." His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The woman lunged, but before her blade could strike, the stranger blocked it, their swords locking. "Go." The stranger shouted at Arik, "To the arch now." Erik ran, weaving through the chaos. The black stone of the platform seemed to vibrate under his feet. The arch loomed ahead, its swirling darkness pulling at him like a tide. He stepped onto the circle of symbols before it, the crystal in his hand glowing brighter. The mark on his arm flared with blinding silver light. Wind roared around him, and the shadows inside the arch writhed like they were alive. The silver-haired woman screamed from behind, "Stop him!" Two armored warriors rushed at him, but the thin man intercepted one, and the stranger cut the other down with a single strike. Erik held the crystal high. The voice from the vision returned, filling the air. "Keep or seal it." The crystal cracked in his hand, shards of black turning to streams of light. They spiraled into the mark on his arm. A deep tone rang out, shaking the ground. The swirling darkness in the arch slowed, then shuddered as if resisting. The silver-haired woman broke past the stranger and ran for Arik, her blade raised, her eyes blazing with fury. At the last moment, the stranger stepped between them. Her sword struck his side, and he staggered, but his own blade found its mark. She fell, her weapon clattering across the stone. Arik felt the last of the crystal's light sink into his arm. The darkness in the arch screamed an inhuman sound that clawed at the air. Then, with a flash like lightning, it vanished. The gate stood empty, its power gone. The hum in the air fading to silence. Erik dropped to his knees, his body shaking. The stranger stood over him, blood staining his cloak. "It's done," he said, his voice low but steady. The thin man approached, breathing hard. "For now," he said, "but the gate will try to open again one day." Erik looked up at the stranger. "What happens now?" he asked. The man gave a faint smile, tired but genuine. "Now," he said, "you learn what it means to be a keeper." The snow began to fall again, soft and quiet. Covering the black stone of the platform, the spire stood silent, its red light gone, far away. The world was safe for the moment. But Arik knew, deep in his chest, that this was only the beginning of something far greater. And whatever came next, he would face it with the stranger by his side.